Next speaker is Professor Steve Weber. He is a faculty director at the University of Berkeley Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity, and also a professor at the Department of Political Science and Information School. And he is one of the world's most expert practitioners of scenario planning. I hope we will have a chance to talk about it.
Thank you so much. And again, I want to echo thanks that my colleagues have offered for the opportunity to spend a couple of days here in Israel and meet with a large number of cybersecurity experts. I come from many years ago a traditional national security background, and in that world, small size tends to be perceived generally, all other things being equal, as a disadvantage. I know that that is felt acutely in Israel in a geographic sense, but I think one of the most lasting impressions that I took away from the last couple of days, and I suspect my colleagues have as well, are the number of ways in which the smallness of this country and the focus on the cybersecurity mission together create quite a distinct set of advantages, which manifest not only in the way in which you've had commercial success, but I think ultimately will manifest as well in the way in which you'll have state success in this regard. So perhaps we could talk a little bit more about that. I did want to take just a couple of minutes to talk about the use of scenario thinking in this environment. I think one of the most important things that we've tried to do at Berkeley, and I know my colleagues at Stanford and MIT have done exactly the same thing, is to upframe the way we think about the cybersecurity problem set, partly by changing the name. Dan, I think, prefers the term computer security. I actually sort of prefer the term digital security, but I think we're all reaching for the same concept, which is that as important and as troubling and as urgent as today's attack and defense dynamics are to any particular actor, there's also a much bigger picture. And the bigger picture is that the world is being changed along so many different dimensions by the digital economy, by digital security, by the digital machines with which we now increasingly spend the larger proportion of our lives interacting, that the term cybersecurity, if it hasn't already, will soon morph into a discussion about all the major values that human beings confront that are important enough that we might label them security, in any way, shape, or form in which they interact with digital machines. And when you raise the level of conceptualization that high, and you think about all the umbrella sets of, or all the issues that can come underneath that umbrella, it quickly becomes a set of problems almost too big to grapple with conceptually. But it also becomes a set of problems that offer the opportunity to find tools and mindsets and organizational mechanisms for becoming a little bit more proactive and seeking problems that are ahead of us in time, just over the horizon, not to ignore the ones we need to deal with today and the reaction to yesterday's attack and closing up and patching pieces of software that today are under attack, but also to orient our research activities, our educational activities, and our attempt to inform the policy process to get ahead of some issues so that we don't get surprised again and again and again. And this is where we've chosen to use a scenario methodology, which was, for those of you who know, it developed originally in the oil sector in the 1970s, when a similar kind of expansion of the mission manifest in the notion that a market or a set of issues that had been reasonably well understood for 50 years, and the price of oil had sort of fluctuated within a very narrow boundary, suddenly did this, and then this, and then this, and the volatility that emerged never actually returned to baseline. What the planners in that industry did was to essentially give up on the notion of predicting something that they felt they could no longer predict, and instead tried to grapple as constructively as they could with overlapping uncertainties that would affect the way in which they had to behave and the way in which the oil sector would emerge. We decided that it would be useful to take a disciplined approach and try to use this kind of future scenario planning orientation to bring together groups of people from the technical part of the sector, from governments, from industry, from different countries to the extent we were able to, and essentially ask them not for answers, but for better questions. And to do that by trying to isolate the most critical uncertainties that they could foresee in the environment, and then force ourselves to integrate them across different realms and different disciplines and ask ourselves, what could that picture look like going forward? And what emerged from that exercise over time was a distilled set of 5 distinct snapshots that, in our view, describe sort of the circumference of a landscape of what the cybersecurity world, or let me call it the cybersecurity problem set, might look like in 2020. But those scenarios, if you'd like to read them, are available on our website. I'd be happy to point people to them and put the URL up if that would be useful. I think the important thing to recognize is that a tool like this is only helpful when it gets used. The way we used it was to look across those different scenarios, all of which are really quite distinct from each other, and all of which are plausible representations of a landscape that might be, and ask ourselves, what kinds of things are robust? What kinds of problems appear in all of those worlds? What are the problems, some of the problems we worry about today, actually, which might be less important? Because I think as critical as it is to be able to foresee the future problems we're going to be able to solve, one of the most important things and contributions that we can make, I think, to the policy debate is also to take a couple things off the agenda if we can. And policy and decision makers that I've spent time with are always asking, some are saying, don't give me another thing to worry about, tell me one thing I don't have to worry about. And so I think it's important to keep that discipline as well. Let me finish with just one quick insight that it gives an example of some of the things that have emerged from that work. We've come to the conclusion that as important as the security of computers, security of digital networks is, as important is for us to start thinking now about how data markets will evolve to value the things that are actually being stolen from those networks. And that this is an important ingredient of many of the other things we want to do, whether it be developing insurance markets, which need price histories and some sense of what the value of the thing that's being insured actually represents, whether it be commercial actors that are constantly trying to make decisions about what they ought to spend in order to protect an asset, which they need to put a value on in order to do. And finally, I think ultimately for governments as well, if they are going to be involved, and I think they have to be and will be in at least partially being responsible for the protection of the commercial aspects of what's going on in the internet, how would one set priorities with, again, not knowing what the value of those different data assets in different part of that commercial economy are? So those are some questions. They're not answers. But I think that's part of what we need to be able to do in the academy, and look forward to interacting with you further around some of those issues.
Thank you.